Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak said that Israel will soon allow Egypt to deploy thousands of troops in the Sinai Peninsula, The Economist reported on Friday. According to the report, Israel will allow helicopters and armored vehicles into the Sinai, but will forbid the entrance of tanks. The move comes after the series of terror attacks in southern Israel on August 18th, which left 8 people dead. Israel and Egypt believe the gunmen responsible for the attacks were militants that infiltrated from the Gaza Strip via Egypt's neighboring Sinai Desert. Officials also suspect that militants from Sinai had also joined the Gaza gunmen in carrying out attacks on Israelis. The deployment of Egyptian troops in Sinai violates the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty, in which both countries agreed that the Sinai Peninsula will be a military-free zone. This concession to Egypt is a terrible strategic move on Israel's part, especially with an interim government in charge. Right now, there are questions as to whether Egypt will even continue with the present peace accord between them. In fact, the U.S. has come out and said that continued peace between Israel and Egypt is contingent upon further U.S. aid to Egypt. If the very real possibility that Egypt could break from its peace accord with Israel did not exist, I have to believe the U.S. wouldn't even consider making this announcement. In an interview with the Palestinian news agency Mayan on Wednesday, Egypt's envoy to the Palestinian territories said that Egypt forbade Israel from launching a large-scale operation in the Gaza Strip following last week's terror attacks. Yasser Othman claimed that Egypt told Israel that it would not allow an operation to take place, and Israel heeded the warning because of fear of the Egyptian people's reaction to such an operation. Frankly, this is an accident waiting to happen. Come September 20th, when the UN recognizes Palestine as a state, if Israel does not comply, I have to believe the Egyptian people will incite the rest of the Middle East into a storm of fury. To make matters worse, the great state in America has declared that if Palestine's bid for UN state recognition continues to go forward, they would cut off U.S. aid. In other related news, the creation of a universally recognized Palestinian state would be just a first step towards wiping out Israel, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad said on Friday. He spoke weeks ahead of a UN General Assembly in New York, where the Arab League plans to seek full UN membership for a Palestinian state. Ahmadinejad, restating a position expressed soon after taking office in 2005 that Israel was a tumor to be wiped off the map, urged Palestinians not to settle for a two-state solution that is backed by Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, but to strive for a complete return of what they consider their land. Recognizing the Palestinian state is not the last goal. It is only one step forward towards liberating the whole of Palestine, Ahmadinejad told worshippers at Friday prayers on International Quds Day, an annual show of support for the Palestinian cause. Here's a twist in the news that I believe could ultimately bring peace to the Middle East. As many of you know, the European Union is the #1 provider of Palestinian financial aid in the world, contributing about $750 million annually. But that could all come to an end very soon. Not because of Palestinians' UN recognition pursuit, but the result of a failing economy. Europe's financial crisis is causing some European Union lawmakers to question whether the bloc can continue to deliver millions in aid to the Palestinians, an EU diplomat said Thursday. With peace talks deadlocked, the diplomat said that some EU lawmakers are in doubt a Palestinian state will ever emerge. The EU at this time has agreed to fulfill the obligation to the Palestinians until 2014, but that could change very quickly if the European economy continues to implode. With the threat of both the U.S. and the EU discontinuing aid to the Palestinians, Could this be the catalyst that forces corrupt Palestinian Authority leaders to settle on a peace accord with Israel? Statehood is meaningless without continued financial support to keep it up and running. For years, the Islamic world has been successful in convincing the international community of the illegitimacy of Israel's right to exist with great success. Even today, on my YouTube channel, I constantly receive comments from non-Muslims declaring Israel as occupiers of Palestinian land, calling for the destruction. Many are from the U.S. and the Western world. Unfortunately, their belief is based upon anti-Semitic rhetoric and not cold hard historical facts. Recently, a video has been released that dispels this rhetoric and gives a clear historical timeline of Israel's legitimate and internationally accepted legal right to the land. Please continue watching to see a portion of this video.
Soviet Union, yes. United Kingdom, abstain. United States, yes.
Resolution of the DAC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
Resolution 181 in the United Nations General Assembly in 1947 paved the way for the rebirth of the State of Israel in 1948. However, did this give Israel legitimacy?
The answer is no. Generally speaking, in international law, General Assembly resolutions are not binding.
It's a wide myth. There's absolutely no truth that Israel's legal foundation is based on the UN Partition Resolution of November 29, 1947.
If the Jewish people and the Arabs had agreed to enter into a treaty based on the terms of resolution, then rights and obligations could have been created in international law. But that didn't happen.
The legal foundation of modern Israel really is initially traced back to the period right after the First World War, when the great powers at the time and the League of Nations, which was the UN of that particular period, had to decide what's going to happen to various former enemy territories.
Howard Grief began practicing law in 1966. For many years, even before that, he had an interest in Middle East affairs. In the 1980s, he began to examine long-hidden documents in the British National Archives that minuted the San Remo Conference of 1920. As a result, he published the book, The Legal Foundation and Borders of Israel Under International Law.
The San Remo Resolution. That is the basic constitutional document of the State of Israel under international law.
San Remo, the Villa de Vachon. This is the place where legal rights were granted. This is the place where legal rights were given to both the Jewish people and the Arab people.
Dr. Jacques Gauthier is an international human rights lawyer. For more than 25 years, his focus has been the legal status of Jerusalem under international law, which was the subject of his doctoral thesis.
It's in this place that the leaders with the power to make binding dispositions with respect to the Ottoman territories deliberated and made the decision, having heard claims from the Zionist organization in Paris in 1919 during the Paris Peace Conference, having heard submissions from the Arab delegation in respect to what they wanted in the Ottoman territories, having heard these submissions, a group of them gathered here and made final binding decisions in international law as to who would get what.
At San Remo, that what had been exclusively a British approach receives the full backing of the international community. And in that sense, Israel's legitimacy is linked to an international decision at San Remo and not just a whim of British policy.
In 1917, Lord Allenby conquered the Holy Land.
and the Jews were promised a national home in Palestine by the Earl of Balfour, a policy endorsed by Woodrow Wilson and by the League of Nations, which made Palestine a British mandate.
In the 1922 Palestine Mandate, the League of Nations together voted on a very special resolution. It decided that they would give recognition to the historic rights of the Jewish people. To do what? To reconstitute their national home. Now, if you look at that language, you see two things. You see they are recognizing a pre-existing right and not creating a new right. In other words, the historical rights of the Jewish people to this land were recognized by the great powers at the time, by the equivalent of the UN at the time.
It was the Jewish people that were chosen to be the beneficiaries of a trust, a mandate under the care of the British government in respect to Palestine. It was the Arab inhabitants of the territories of Mesopotamia, Iraq now, Syria and Lebanon that were chosen to be the beneficiaries of a trust or a mandate. Part of it under the trusteeship of or mandate of the French, Syria and Lebanon, part of it under British supervision, Mesopotamia. I want to underline that the primary objective of the mandate for Palestine was to grant political rights in respect to Palestine to the Jewish people.
The civil and religious rights of the Arabs as individuals were fully protected in the mandate document. But insofar as the national and collective rights and the collective political rights were concerned, these were reserved exclusively for the Jewish people because the Arabs were given those same rights not in Palestine but in the neighboring countries. And that is why today you have 21 Arab states and 1 Jewish state.
The Second World War brought about the demise of the League of Nations. It was superseded by the United Nations in 1945.
The Charter of the United Nations, which you are now signing, is a solid structure upon which we can build for a better world.
How does this affect the rights of the Jewish people under international law?
In their final resolution passed by the League in April of 1946, it is specified that the intent is that after the dissolution of the League, it is necessary to continue to look after the well-being and the development of the people concerned in each mandate. And for Palestine, that meant the Jewish people.
So the rights that were recognized as inhering in the Jewish people were preserved by Article 80.
There's nothing in the Charter which is to be construed in or by itself as taking away or altering the rights given to any people prior to the establishment of the United Nations. And I refer, for instance, to Article 8 of the Charter.